Welcome back to Becoming a Real Life Superhero. I'm Jen and I currently smell like duck because my duck had an emergency. Today I'm really honored to have Alicia McCalla with us. She's very kindly agreed to come and talk with us about a very sensitive topic, how to heal after loss and grief, and how to best comfort someone else and not be a dick. She writes kick-ass black women main characters in superhero, supernatural thrillers, and fantasy for nerds who are concerned about representation and love high-action stories of courage, bravery, and strength. I worked with her on the Superhero Mega Anthology, which you can actually still download below, and I started to stalk her a little bit because I was not only impressed by her professionalism and drive, like there's certain thinking patterns and writing in her writing style that were similar to mine that I haven't seen anywhere else. Certain little ways of bringing you more intimately into the point of view of the character, and I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like a kindred I just felt kind of a kindred writer spirit reading her work. So I started to stalk her a little bit, and I discovered that she suffered a significant personal blow before becoming what she is today. Today we're also going to be interviewing Anette, who is a civilian attorney with the Army and also in the past has worked pro bono providing legal care for indigent patients who can't afford legal care. She also has extensive experience in the court system fighting for folks who have disabilities, specifically because of things that have happened in our own family. She also happens to be my mom, trying to get access for people who deserve as much of a good education as any of the rest of us. I wanted to, just for the viewers a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about loss that you experienced?
Yeah, so I've actually gone through several losses in the last 10 years, but the most traumatic one for me would be the death of my son who drowned while hiking with some friends.
I can. I will caveat this a little bit with the difficulty that it is oftentimes when you're a survivor of something that has such an incredible impact. Oftentimes it can be kind of hard to discuss or talk about it because it does dredge up a lot of emotions and also grief brain episodes. Grief brain is real. For those of you like me who suffer from grief brain, my heart really goes out to you and my empathy because I understand what it's like to be like that.
And that was extremely difficult, obviously. I know some moms who are still really struggling to cope with it 20, 25 years later. You just don't really expect your children to die before you. Everybody knows that everyone is bound to die. Nobody knows anyone who's, lived forever. So we all know our children are going to die, but we don't expect to be there when they do. And such a young person with so much promise, it's really difficult and very devastating.
About 3 years ago, on a Sunday, my husband and I were at home and we received a call from the Navy. And not only a call, but people were outside our door. And so we ended up having a petty officer tell us that our son was lost at sea. And that they were currently doing a manhunt in the ocean off of over in the Pacific to find him because they were on some kind of maneuvers. And for me, that was like the worst day, moment. I don't know. I can't express it. But we sat at home for at least a day or two, and we still hadn't heard anything. And as a matter of fact, the experience was so surreal, we were struggling to figure out if it really even happened because the Navy was not very forthcoming with us. They weren't communicating. So I went on Facebook and I did a video and I told people what was happening. And that set off a whole other string for me. So that video got 400,000 views around the world.
Wow.
And that's when another level of grief brain started with calls. Like our phone then was, our home phone, our regular phones were ringing off the hook. And I'll just be honest with people, I had a nervous breakdown because of that. It was just, so one thing about losing your child, but another when it's such a horrible experience. And I'm very thankful for family members and friends who came out and supported us during that time.
You know, you mentioned people, the phones ringing off the hook, and people being really, you know, wanting to come forward, probably all with the best intentions. And obviously, like you said, when you lose someone, you're grateful that people care. However, I also know when my brother died, that I didn't want to talk to people very much.
Mm-hmm.
What were the things that you found that were most helpful to you during that time, and ways that maybe other people can emulate when they're helping someone suffer a loss like that?
I think everybody experiences it differently, but I think it's helpful to kind of understand what it's like, although you can't until you really feel that yourself. So for me, it was like, you know, it was just a real physical shock. It was extremely difficult to believe. And once I realized that it was actually true, and I saw my son's dead body, because I had to see him, even though I knew mentally that people were probably not lying to me about it, but I had to see him for myself. So when I saw him and it really hit you, for me, that was it was like standing at the edge of a cliff, and there's nothing but darkness down this chasm, and there's a real danger that you're just going to fall over the edge and into this chasm without any assurance that you can get back out of this deep dark hole.
So in the very beginning, I think for us, it was just absolutely traumatizing, you know, because there was so much going on. You've got the news and the people, and it was this huge thing. And some people were very helpful, like you were saying, like family members just showed up and they were offering food and a lot of praying and vigils. And some people were not. They just wanted a news story, or they just wanted to hear the information. In fact, I labeled those people. I called them grief mongers.
Yes.
They were like grief vampires.
Yes.
I mean, they just came out of the woodwork, and it just, they were not concerned about us at all. They just wanted to know what happened. And I think it needs to be in reverse. So people need to allow the person that's grieving to talk about whatever they'd like to talk about, even if it's about food or about something, you know, like I found myself just out in the backyard, and it was like hundreds of people just coming to visit us, and I just couldn't anymore.
So for me, my effort was to try and stay away from the chasm. Now, I know some people experience it differently. They need to just go sleep for months, right? But for me, I needed to be occupied with something. And I really feel like my kids, my other kids, really did a lot just by their sheer existence, because as a parent, you have to continue. You don't want your other kids to feel like they're not as important as the one you've lost, even though while you're grieving, it's really difficult to think of anyone but that child. And so it's hard to come up with just one thing that will solve all problems, you know, do this and that's going to fix it. I don't think there is one solution to grief. I think we need to respect other people and how they grieve. And we need to come alongside them and just be a good listener and wait and see if there's a cue as to what we can do. I think it's important not to fight with them. So my mom died a few years before Jonathan, actually very close to his birthday. And my father was very, very angry about her death. He felt she was an extremely wonderful person, and he would have preferred to die rather than her dying. And so he felt very angry at God. And he just generally was very angry. And I made sure not to fight with him, not to tell him, oh, you know, you're sinning because it's not God's fault, or, you know, something crazy like that. Because I think a lot of times people just need time. They need to work things out in their own mind. They need to deal with it. And so I just let him know that I was there. And I think, you know, a couple years down the road, you know, he felt that he had a wrong attitude. And so he apologized about it. But you know, he didn't need to apologize to me. I didn't bring it up to him. But it's just a phase. You know, I think people have been told that there are certain phases they have to go through. But I think what's not so clear is that sometimes the phases are, they reoccur, or they are, you know, they don't come in a certain order.
Yeah, the evidence really shows that there's no evidence for the order that people have been taught at all. Yeah.
And so I was just sitting in the backyard, just looking at the trees, and I didn't want to talk. I was in trauma, you know what I'm saying? And so I appreciated those that just came, and they didn't say anything. They just sat with me. They just held my hand. They didn't ask no questions, because sometimes you just can't voice or speak. So I would say in the very beginning, just allowing that person or whoever is suffering the grief to just engage in their grief and not try to impress or put your, you know, to colorize the experience. Oh, that should be so horrible for you or whatever. Just allow people to experience whatever it is that they're experiencing. I think in the very beginning is important.
So I think it's important to listen. And if you can help them, don't force yourself on people, because some people just want to be alone. And, there's nothing you can really say, because, you know, you've never been down in that chasm. And even if you have, even if you've been in the darkest place in the universe, you've experienced it differently from those people, most likely.
There was another person in my class when Jonathan died, who came up to me very like non-intrusively to let me know that his brother had died when he was a lot younger, and it was an older brother. So he mentioned, like, I know, and I think he's even said, I know it's different, but and I don't even remember exactly what he said. I just remember really appreciating that he seemed to kind of understand a little bit of what I was going through. So sharing his own story was helpful to me, but he didn't share it in a way that was prescriptive. That's kind of a common theme when we talk about, you know, in other times when we talk about abuse victims or sexual assault survivors, being descriptive instead of prescriptive, not telling your story in a way like, well, this is what happened to me, and therefore this is what you need to do because this is what worked for me. Instead of being prescriptive, being descriptive. This is my story, and I offer it. And they can take what they want or leave what they want. I don't even remember very much of it. I remember certain details, but what I remember most is the feeling of like someone else felt and understood a little bit of my pain and was kind of there. And so I think that kind of hits on, and we haven't talked since, and there's another person in my medical school class, but he was the only person whose condolences I remember. He was more helpful at that time than some people who were very close to me. He's the only person whose condolences I remember because he did it with that like perichoresis, like space, giving me space, but at the same time being gentle and like offering me this like togetherness. And I think that kind of touches on what you're saying, that like you have to understand everyone suffers differently, and be useful.
Yeah, flexible.
That's a good word. Yeah. Those of you who watch regularly know I'm usually a little bit more comfortable in these interviews. And you can probably see I'm a little bit stiffer, having a little more trouble with words, obviously because it's my brother. But I felt that this was an important thing to share with you all. And I felt that like my mom's journey, especially as somebody who's had a lot of kids and a lot of sad things happen to a lot of kids, because there are other sad things that have happened to our other siblings, and that are almost as severe. And I think it's helpful to share her perspective. So I wanted to do this, even though it's a little bit uncomfortable for both of us. So bear with me, my dear viewer. You touched on this a little bit, Mom, but about like steps that things that people should not do. What you kind of transitioned a little bit from things that are helpful to things people don't do. Can you tell us a little bit more about some kind of things that were particularly unhelpful that should not be done, specifically maybe things people say? Because I think sometimes people say things trying to be helpful, and it's actually, I wish that they would go away.
Yes, and that's so unfair, right? Because they really are trying to help.
They're trying.
You. Yes. And sometimes people then place you in a position where, in addition to grieving, you now have to be really polite to them and appreciate what they're doing, even though they may be hurting you, right? So one person,
what kind of things in advance can they not do, those people who want to help?
Well, from my viewpoint, I mean, maybe somebody else wants someone to come and cry with them, but for me, that was just so terrible when people came and just wept all over me about my son, and I just felt like it's not your son. You can't imagine how I'm feeling, and you barely knew him, and now you're weeping, and I'm just gonna fall right over the cliff if you don't stop. But you can't be yelling at people, and you just tell them, oh, thank you for your kind words. I'm sorry. Yes, he touched a lot of lives, but really you just want to run away from there.
Yeah.
Frankly, because they're hurting you while you are in serious pain.
Yeah.
And so one person came over and they just kept on and on. And I had to actually just say I had to leave the house and leave that person with the rest of my family. And I had to go shopping at Walmart to protect myself from the injury of their condolences.
Don't want that. We talk about that in medicine. I think it's really interesting for you to bring that particular thing up. Actually surprises me a little bit. About like not having your grief, and it's something that's been really tough for me to learn as a physician, like not having your grief distract from the other person's grief, especially in cases like I've had, like where there's a dead baby, right? You need to probably not be there weeping. And there is a time when people want to see that you have a heart in medicine, where they want to see a tear or two. And people have complained about that to me. People have said like they delivered the news and he didn't even care. He just said it matter of factly. And I was like, like every doctor grieves differently as well. So every doctor has their own. So you just said it matter of factly. But in fact, what that person needed was a little bit of sadness. At the same time, I have made the error before of being too emotional about someone else's pain, and you have to like pull back and have the strength to stop and think like, what am I doing practically that's helping this person right now? And am I going to be able to focus if I let this overtake me? And it's not always so healthy, but like as a physician or anyone who's helping person, you have to suppress a little bit, not repress. Repression is permanent. Suppression is a healthy post-Freudian technique where you like put it down for now and you can pull it out later. And of course, that's, if you put it down a lot of times, you end up like me and you have like you're dealing with your PTSD symptoms because you've got so many things you got to do, but you do have to know when to like, this needs to be put aside so that we can get it done. And so I think it's interesting that you touched on that, because it's actually similar to how we do grief stuff with patients, not to sit there weeping all over them.
But I will say this, because there is a difference between when you first have the experience and then, like for me, this would be year 3 of losing Asante. And so in the very beginning, people would say things like, oh, time will heal. And okay, so I'm just gonna be
that's
honest.
not a fun thing to hear, right? It's
No.
like, no, please shut up. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Oh, no, thank you.
Yes.
Maybe it's true, but no, thank you. And maybe it's not true.
I think we don't say it's not true. We call it misinformation. So that's a big piece of misinformation that time somehow will take away. And so what happens is when you say things like time will heal, or you say things like in the by and by, you'll see your child again, or what happens is you're diminishing that person's experience, or you're changing that person's, or you're trying to place your idea of what that experience is on someone else. And the truth of the matter is, I feel the exact same way 3 years later about the loss of my child, and more than likely for the rest of my life, right? This was my only child, and it's a struggle for me. One of the things that my husband and I talk about is, well, we just had Asante. We didn't have any other children. And so even if we had other kids, it wouldn't diminish the experience of being Asante's parent. But that, because he was our only son, I will never be a grandparent. I will never experience that level. And so that's extremely hurtful for me. Because recently I lost my grandparents to COVID. And so I lost my grandma, my grandfather first last year, and then my grandma like a month later, because they were in the nursing home. Then they didn't have the same rules and ways, so a lot of the elderly passed away. And so, as I was going through my grief recovery, I realized that, gosh, I love my grandma. And so I got hit hard with, you'll never be a grandma. Because that was one of my things, is that, I was going to be a grandma like my grandmother. You know what I'm saying? So I think there's a tremendous amount of loss. And so people often diminish that. And it's like, well, you have nieces and nephews, or we'll give you so-and-so. And it's like, no, it doesn't replace
so-and-so
that.
won't be Asante, which by the way is a beautiful name. Oh my God. It's, and I think it's so interesting that you bring up also the only child factor, and exactly what you said about how if you had other children, it wouldn't mean that you loved him less, or that the loss would be, you would still feel horrible losing him, right?
Yes. But
it does make a difference, and it's actually something even my dad said when we lost Jonathan. That was actually literally what he said, like the same thing that you said in his own kind of stiff way, but literally that same thing, that like it the other thing with as a parent, you know, it's like you've invested your whole life into this person.
Yeah.
And that was another thing he said was like, that was so much work, which is
It
a very
was.
blunt way to put it. He
Yes.
dealt with his grief initially very differently than, you know, my mom did. And I think a lot of people did, in that he cracked a lot of inappropriate jokes, like right away at the beginning. It was the only way he could handle it. He couldn't just, he just couldn't. But that was a thing that he said. He at one point even made a joke about it being the president's fault, because there was an interesting chain of events that would have resulted in my brother not being at a certain place. So at that time he said, you know, and it was like totally off-color joke, but you could see he was doing it because he was suffering, and that was just how he
think
dealt.
off-color jokes are the way to go. I had many. You know, there was some point when we were talking to NCIS and they just did not give us any answers. And finally, I just looked at the guy and was like, look, did the aliens come and a ship take my boy away? Like, where the hell is my child? Where's his body? Where's this? You know, I think sometimes the surrealism or the disbelief, like I feel your dad, because, you know, with Asante, we showed up as parents, we did what we needed to do. Asante graduated from college. He was working 2 years, was a Navy officer, right? I mean, what I'm saying is we did what we needed to do as parents. So we had finally got to the point where it was like, you know, you could rest, and then wham.
Yeah.
So I understand what your dad is saying. So I think it's very different when you lose I guess you say a grown ass person versus even somebody who had a baby. And I'm not trying to diminish a woman who's lost a baby, because that's a trauma and a pain all in of itself. But I think these circumstances and situations for each loss is different.
Absolutely.
So we have to find our ways to accept that not every loss is the same, that not everyone's experience is the same experience, and that the grief and loss is really about how you as a person, how you experience it, and how you deal with that grief and loss. And that requires lots of introspection, lots of acceptance, lots of dealing with your emotions and your feelings, and being transparent, you know, being openly honest with people, with yourself, you know, not engaging in that Academy Award acting where you're, I'm just fine, and you know, I've survived. You know what? For me personally, I liken this experience in terms of somebody taking either a butcher knife or something to my heart where it was obliterated. I mean, it's literally like an atom bomb hit my house. I was ground zero, and where the door used to be over here, now it's behind me. Or up there where there used to be a window, the window is shattered and on this side. Like everything was topsy-turvy. And that's the sum total of my experience. And so no amount of me, like people would say, well, you could return to work or you could do whatever. That wasn't going on anymore. That was done.
If you're thinking from the viewpoint, and of course I haven't thought from the viewpoint of a doctor or a medical provider, but I think it's important to be available, right? But to be careful. So if the patient does want to talk to you, be available. But if they don't, you know, then that's okay too. I think you have to just watch signals, right? So you have to pay attention to that person and see, are they spiraling down into some dark hole, or are they working on, you know, dealing with this shock. And
Mhm.
it's very physical. It's a very physical shock. So I felt my mindset was positive because my son was awesome. I had a very good relationship with him. And I'm so grateful that I had a good relationship with him. It would have been much worse if it had been, we had been estranged or something. I don't know how parents that are estranged from their kids and then find out they've passed away, how they deal with it. It's really painful.
Yeah.
But so I was so grateful for that. And my family was supportive. We all understood we needed to support each other, regardless of how we were expressing the grief. So one thing that my husband did that I thought was very, very good was actually not with Jonathan's grief, but another grief that I experienced. And he had been deployed for a year and came back, and we were still dealing with our personal grief. And I actually, for the first time in my life, I could not watch sad movies. So anything sad, and I would just lose it. And this is not my case. I'm usually known as being pretty tough cookie. So
you do cry a lot during movies, though.
Yeah, but when we turned on this movie, I thought I was just gonna lose it totally. Not, I mean, like cry, like, oh, that's nice and emotional.
No,
But
I
like,
know what you mean.
I'm
Like,
gonna
you
have
a
to
breakdown,
sit in
have a
bed
panic
because-
attack. Yeah.
Yes, I'm really losing it. And he was like, fine. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. He turned off the TV right away. And people just really respected my desire not to see anything sad for several years after that. And that was very helpful.
He paid attention to your cues.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is good. What kind of cues do you think somebody, I know this is maybe a difficult question, but like a friend can kind of look out for? Everyone has different facial expressions, but sometimes there are some cues that maybe the person's a little uncomfortable and needs a little more space, or needs a little more compassion, or needs less. I think most of the time people need a little less. I think that's usually the problem, right? What are some cues maybe in the conversation? Like, for example, that person who was really a lot of weeping on you. What are some things about your body language or your face, maybe that they might have been able to pick up on if they hadn't had stuff in their eyes, that might have been able to help a little bit in changing their reaction?
Well,
that's a tough question.
Well, I think from my viewpoint, so let's say you're grieving and you're in the hospital. Let's say you're a parent who's lost a child at birth, actually, which happens quite often, right? Mm-hmm. And, you've pushed your way into their hospital room. Well, if they're not really talking to you, or they're closing their eyes, or pretending to sleep, that might be, a cue that says, and you can just feel out people. You can say, do you need me to come back later? Or would you feel more comfortable if I left now? Or, just kind of communicate with them. And I think people will tell you they just don't want to be, they don't want to be rude to you and put that on top of, everything else they're dealing with. I think you probably have viewers. I mean, if people are listening to this, it's because they care about their suffering friends, mm-hmm. and they want to do right by them. That's a very different mindset from the people on the highway who stop their car to see an accident on the other side. Mm-hmm. And you want to make sure you're not that person, who's just, you were never their friend, but now you're in their hospital.
Now you're their best friend. Yeah.
Yes, because you want to be part of the drama.
Yeah.
That's pitiful. That's sad. And it's hurtful. And you're taking up time that a real friend, during. Yes. Yes.
There's definitely that aspect, especially in medicine, where, people will talk about, this is an interesting case, so you better come in and see this interesting case. I was so offended when I first heard those terms, because at that age, I had already had one of my brothers almost die from an intestinal rupture. One of my brothers have permanent, mental disability that will, that has affected all of us. I had already had one of my, my littlest sister almost die in the hospital, which I think is the time you're talking about hospital rooms, right? I'd already had all these things happen, and I'm the only one of the siblings who watched everybody grow up. I'm the only one who was old enough to watch really everybody except for my second oldest brother, who I did not watch him grow up because he grew up with me, right? Everybody else, Jonathan, I was the only one I got to hold in my arms ever, because I was all, as a baby, because I was always taking care of the kids during all the other births.
Yes.
And so, like, I had already had all these things happen, and I would get very triggered in medical school. I got very angry during the lectures on autism. I wanted to just fight all the teachers. I would get so upset because I hadn't actually processed how I felt about really the loss of that my autistic brother. I really felt like having lost him, because I saw that transition from because I saw that I was in his therapy so often, and I saw those moments when it looked like we were going to get him and get him back. And I remember before he shut off, when he wanted to come play with us as a little 2-year-old, and we were older siblings, and older siblings always do this, say, no, go away. And I wish we had not said, no, go away, right? Because you feel guilty about that when it's not your fault. You're a child and trying to play with your toys, and your little brother is messing with them. But when that child does go away and never mentally come back, you feel like you did something when you didn't, right? That's why we get rid of the Freudian theory of guilt, because Freud's theory was terrible, that it's like family members' fault that a child is autistic. But you feel that, and so like watching, so having had all that happen already, hearing people in medical school say this is an interesting case, I was like, you never want to be an effing interesting case, I was like, I don't want someone to be, so it's like that investigative, curious mind is valuable for a lot of things, but you got to turn off that investigative, curious mind at some point, and just, and I know I've fallen into that before, where I've asked like one question too many, because I do a lot of sexual health care, and sometimes there's just that one question too many, especially about that very personal thing. Like sex is a very personal topic. Sometimes there's just that one question too many, where it's like, did that really help with your diagnosis, or was that you wanting to know?
Were you being a drive-by stopper?
Yes, exactly.
So one of the things I think I first would like to acknowledge is, when you have an incredible loss like this, you might do better by likening it to having a heart attack, or likening it to breaking your leg, or likening it to some appendage. Because once you accept, see, one thing about grief brain is that it's mental. And so people tend to discount it, or tend to go, oh no, I can just do that, right? No. If a person had a heart attack, or if a person broke their leg, we wouldn't be walking around going, well, just get up and walk, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I got you had a heart attack. So what's wrong with you? Why
just
are
deal
you
with it?
Yeah.
It'll get better in time.
Yeah.
It'll get better in time.
Like, will your heart ever be, what's wrong with you? You're still talking about you had that heart attack that you almost died. What's wrong with you?
I had someone a month after my brother died. I was at a party, and they asked me how I was, just like the chill, how are you doing? And I said, well, my brother's still dead, so I'm not great. And the person said to me, and someone else standing nearby, and I know they regret having done this, but this person standing nearby was like, wow, way to be a downer. And it's kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna be a downer. My brother died.
Right.
Like, what you want? You want me to come at this party and be the life of the party here?
Right. And that's it. But I think literally, if people saw you as someone who broke their leg, or that you came to that party and you had a cast on your leg, right? Then people wouldn't be saying such things, because they would go, oh, you've got a cast on your leg, I understand. But don't let it be said that it's just other people. It's the person as well. So with me, I had to take an inventory and toll of myself. I mean, I had a nervous breakdown and I had to deal with that. So I loved being a librarian. I loved being a media specialist, and I did it for 20 years. But I hit a brick wall, and no amount of me trying to get myself up and get back to work was going to do it.
Kind of segueing into it is the idea of not re-traumatizing people, right? So my son died because he had a seizure. And when I say my son, it's our
I know what you mean. You're talking to the viewer.
Right? So,
I know it's our Jonathan. I don't
But-
feel left out.
Okay, so because he had a seizure and he had walked away, I think, from his group because he wasn't feeling good. He was standing in water. They were not near him. And so he drowned, right? At first, we didn't know that. And so, 30 people and a lot of people from Facebook crawling out of the woodwork, so to speak. And they want to know what happened, right? And that's just not really helpful. Don't ask what happened. They're dead, for goodness sakes. It doesn't matter how it happened. Are you expecting that the parents strangled them? I mean, what are you thinking? And then the other important thing to really consider here is, what can you do for this person? Here's what you can do. Bring them back to life. Bring them back to life.
So that's nothing, in other words.
That's
nothing.
Yes.
Yeah. Because you can't do that.
They want. Yes. That's what they want. And so when you ask, is there anything I could do for you? Well, they're thinking, yes, bring him back right now. I'll sell my house. I'll do anything. Bring him back.
Yeah.
And you can't. So, be humble and do what you can. Like, I had someone come and clean my house, and I had people bring me meals. That was lovely. And it was so helpful because you're not thinking of cleaning anything. You're not thinking of making meals. You're just thinking of surviving each day. Yeah.
Actions speak louder than words in that situation. Very much. Very much. I mean, with the bringing back, I think that was one of the things that still sticks with me, that somebody said a couple years later, actually, and it made me so angry. I wasn't angry at the time. I wasn't mean to them or anything. I did just today post a little snide thing on Facebook because Jonathan's birthday was yesterday. But they said, well, aren't you happy though that his death brought us all together? And my thought is I would never have a relationship with you again if I could bring him back. I don't care. I like you, but not that much. I would rather have my brother back than have a relationship with you 100%. It's a life versus a friendship. His life is more important to me. I would never speak to anyone of all of you again if it would bring him back. That would be difficult because I talk a lot, but it's like I don't care. Sorry, I don't care about you as much as about my dead brother. It's kind of the idea, because it's not equivalent. It's not like, oh, you got a new friend after your brother died, and it's like, you're not him. I missed out on the best years of his life because of medical school, and you're not fixing that at all. I just want to buy my brother some cheese and play Monopoly with him, okay? That's all I want. I don't want, So yeah, so what you're saying about actual actions, I think that's golden, especially because I think one thing that's so I have still physical nausea, and and like feeling like sick to my stomach, like something happened. Not as much now, but especially in the first year right after, when I would think about it, it's not as strong as a mother's reaction. Mothers tend to have, this is anecdotal, this is not based on studies, but I've noticed that the mothers I have known, even as patients, tend to have very strong physical reactions to grief. I mean, Alicia called it like having a disability, like because you just feel, because it's your child, so it's a little bit different. And obviously I'm not going to have you talk on that because that's a very personal thing. And sometimes those things are like, a lot of pelvic pain is a thing that I've seen in patients as well. But I think it's important for people who want to help to understand that there's like a physical thing going on, and that the person is tired just as if they had like a broken leg, you know?
Yes.
So it's,
yes, for me, it was really feeling like I'm choking, you know, and there's no good way to deal with that. The inability to sleep. And I, you know, in defense of the people trying to help you, I think it is human nature is to try and look for the good somehow. Well, I mean, there's two sides to that. One is to find blame somehow so that you can distance yourself and say, this is never going to happen to me. This happened to those people because they did X, Y, and Z. I think that's one side of human nature.
Which we saw that a lot with the autism.
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of people would not like to have a severely autistic child. And so it's hard for them to think that that's a very real possibility. And I believe it really is a very real possibility. And I don't think those numbers are getting better. Yeah. I think they're getting worse. So, you know, I feel bad for the unsuspecting world out there waiting to have an autistic child or brother or whatever. But the other side is people they're looking for good. And I was amazed at how the church came together. It didn't matter. We were, you know, miles away from where he was, and even the funeral director that I worked with, I think was very unusual, because a lot of times they kind of money centered, and that really hurts you too.
Yeah, someone's trying to make money off of your. Yeah, that's the most horrible thing.
But we had a really good liaison there, and I mean, they let people offered us all kinds of things at Liberty University. We were offered to you know, sleep at someone's house that we really didn't know that well. I mean, we knew them, but not to sleep at their house. And just a lot of kindness extended to us. And just those acts, they do a lot. I mean, I could cry about that now, really, because it's so kind. Yeah. And people who don't need information. They just need to know what can they do for you. And those people are golden. They are.
Yeah, no, like I had a pitch memorized for the information. I did it, and it was really weird because I listened to myself and I was telling it, just like when I pitch like novels or report to the attending physician, where you go, okay, 28-year-old male had, you know, this kind of blah 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 and this kind of blah 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 and this kind of that, like a pitch. I had a pitch like that about Jonathan's death, to answer people's questions, just like that, because you know, people ask for the answers, and so you kind of, and you find yourself saying it over and over and over again. And I didn't have the same reaction exactly like you, where it was like you can't even talk about it, because I had so much practice pitching and pitching terrible stuff, that it was like I was pitching someone else. It was not like I was talking about, you know, like things. It was different, like if I were to feel or talk about. So Joseph and I yesterday watched, one of my other brothers and I yesterday watched a old home video that had Jonathan in it. And I heard Joseph going, oh, over the other side. I can't see his face, so I don't know what his reaction was. But, you know, like that's what like gives you the, I think for some of us, thinking about the good memories sometimes brings pain. And like it's a poor defense mechanism, but it's called intellectualizing. And that was kind of my go-to. So actually even knowing the details about what had happened to him, was part of my like defense mechanism. It's an immature defense mechanism, intellectualizing it and doing like that. But in my case, it was like it was the one I had. It was the one I could reach for, in this situation. And it literally was like a pitch, to rattle off to somebody. So I love the point you're making about the you know, do something physical is so helpful. Moving into that, like taking care of yourself as a survivor and how to heal so that you can, you know, help others. Because I mean, you're out there advocating, right now. I mean, your mission is advocating for representation in fiction, which I mean, to me, I think it's, you know, incredibly valuable. You hear about it. I mean, that creates the heroes of the future generations, right? Is young kids see these things and they, it changes what they think they are able to do, right? So that's, you know, in some ways you are, I don't want to say mothering, but you are influencing the children of other, you know, other generations and other people now through the work that you're doing. But that is a process. Like, how do you get to be, you know, to have that kind of strength and do that? How has your, what other ways did you find practically to help heal so you could get to that level of functioning? Because like I said, I mean, you're a go-getter. You put things together, you respond, you do work. You do more work than a lot of other people I see, especially among indie authors. But you know, like you're talking about, like right after the loss, you feel you can't do anything. So how did you get to that level of functioning? And I guess what other ways would you recommend to somebody as they're trying to heal and get back into their life's mission? Because it's hard.
You have to deal with what's done in your life, what you can handle. And if you've got 5 things to do in the day, brush your teeth, wash your face, change your clothes, change your underwear, right? Pick one.
Yeah. You end up having to knock things off the list because you can't handle them. And it's powerful also, the metaphor actually that you say. It's amazing because it's literally the same as even the loss of children back in ancient times is actually described that way, as a sword to the mother's heart is described that way in scriptural poetry. It's like this common thread in some ways that unites the mothers of history, but at the same time, like you said, it's so unique to each person. And some people do need activity to keep them going, and other people need to just not. They just need a break.
I think it's important to let yourself grieve and figure out what helps you. So personally for me, working helps me, and I think you know, I feel like I am doing very well. I'm able to get through each day without crying about my son. I think I feel like I'm healthy about it. I'm not obsessing about him. But yeah, working is very much a blessing for me. So I'm very grateful that a few years ago I, you know, was offered the job that I was offered. And whatever it is, I mean, you don't feel guilty about it. I'm kind of old, so you know, starting a second career, I should say, that's maybe surprising to people around me. But it's all about what can you take, because even though I feel like I personally am doing well with surviving that grief and the 3 other griefs that I've had in the last 10-15 years. And I think faith is an important part. So I feel like God has been there with me, and I feel that God prepared me actually for that grief, so that I got some minor griefs that I was able to deal with and see that I could survive. And so that's a whole faith piece there too. Can you make it past this? and come out a functioning human being. So whatever you need to do, if you need to sleep 5 months straight, don't apologize to somebody about that. Do something healthy. I mean, if you find yourself doing something unhealthy, that's a real warning sign. Taking too many prescription drugs, or engaging in other unhealthy activity, that should be a warning to you that you're not dealing well with it. You're trying to drown your sorrows, or you're trying to escape from reality. There comes a point where you have to face that you have to keep living, and people need you, and there's nobody on earth here that isn't needed. We need you, and we need you as a healthy contributor. So whatever you can do to get yourself to that point.
But what did do it? Well, what do you love? What drives you? First of all, we created a scholarship for Asante, and we donated $50,000 to Morehouse College. And we had determined that our mission was going to be to create a legacy. We lost our boy, but we was going to help other Black boys to be successful, right?
Yes.
So that legacy was very important to do. And I moved away from looking at Asante in this light of victimization and looking at it from a space of celebration of life. Mm-hmm. It was very important for us, and for me in particular, to continue my relationship with Asante, but in a way that was different. The relationship between me and Asante had changed substantially. And so I had to go in and relearn and rework and deal with my emotions.
People do different stuff. I mean, some people, they need to celebrate that life regularly, and they need to mourn that life. I know some people feel guilty if they forget that lost one. I think that's, that doesn't work for me. I don't think I should feel guilty because, I didn't cause his death. And, I obviously the loss is terrible for us, but we believe him to be in a better place. But don't feel guilty. Do what you can that's healthy for you to deal with your circumstances. For me, it's working. If I'm not working, if I'm not busy, but that's my personality too. I was always kind of like that. I had to have 10 things spinning in the air. So, yeah. You know who you are, you know what you need. And if you're a friend, help that person to get there. Time is such a friend. I think because after a while you get a different perspective, and you should be focusing on the people who are alive. And time helps you to do that.
My writing did change substantially. It became more about legacy and courage and bravery and strength. And I wanted at all times to be able to honor Asante. And so I have some short stories that, I began to then write from the space of themes that were messages of hope or gratitude in a different way. Mm-hmm. So everything about my life in the writing and the work changed. Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes if you need to go to your doctor and get a medication, that is legitimate. But absolutely you do have to check out for how is it making you feel. And it's really recommended that you supplement that with some kind of, either an active therapy or something else that you are doing yourself. It can be hard sometimes to know when you need to drop something and try something else, because you might think, well, maybe I just need to stick this out. Maybe it's something wrong with me. But really, you don't have time to be wasting with things that are not working. If it's not working after, like a month, switch to something else, try somebody else. Give it a month. Like there are SSRIs that take a month and a half. You got to maintain your mind and body. So, don't feel guilty about taking care of yourself. You're taking care of yourself so that you can come back and use what you've suffered as a great way to help other people. There's a reason that all these heroes all have these tragic origin stories, right? Because there is some truth to that like it is out of darkness that are born some of the most beautiful people. And so you gotta allow yourself to go through that and then to come out the other side. And if you can come out the other side, empowered, then instead of broken, because you've taken care of yourself and healed appropriately, you're able to do so much for the world. And there is only one you.
I actually did about 3 years of grief recovery method. I love the book, and I work with my grief counselor, Anne Keaton. She was fantastic. And so part of grief recovery method is to start writing letters to those critical, important relationships in your life. And then you end it by actually doing a letter to the person that you've lost. So then you're able to look at the patterns, and you're able to look at the experiences that you had with that person and see it from the space of forgives and the space of significant emotional statements and places of gratitude for that person. So grief recovery method was fantastic. But even after grief recovery method, there was still some for me because I was functioning. But what I learned is that I was doing 40% positive and 60% negative in my days. So there were some days that the despair just was really high. So I found a lot of relief with grief recovery method, and I found a lot of emotional release, but I still was in a very negative brain pattern. So my second part that I worked with Anne on was the PQ, or positivity quotient, where I start to work with my personal saboteurs and understand like what were some of the things that were driving me with the negativity, like my judgment and my trying to control situations and having high anxiety. And I do suffer still from having anxiety attacks from this. And so I have to learn to work with that. In the very beginning, medication wise, the doctor had prescribed some drugs that put me out. But as I went along, I knew I didn't want to take those drugs. So then I investigated the herbal things. So between the grief recovery therapy and the PQ, then I start taking things like ashwagandha and herbal things to help me, melatonin to help me to be able to sleep. And then finally, the last thing that I worked through was transformational coaching. And that was very helpful. And my transformational coach, Holly Lasky, she helped me to do a NLP, process where you actively grieve in your sleep, in your subconscious. And so you work with your subconscious to come up with a number of days, hours, whatever was necessary, so that instead of you're grieving throughout the day and the level of despair, that you're actually grieving in your subconscious and working at it at a different level. And so all three of those things for me have been critical. And I won't lie to people and say that these things
it's not a magic bullet.
Yes.
Nothing is a magic bullet.
Yes. Because I still occasionally will have anxiety, especially when Navy contacts us or sends things or whatever.
Oh, so
yes. Get these things that kind of, come back up again. It returns that. So
I couldn't for a couple months after, I had to be conscious of not avoiding my mother's phone calls, because since she had called me to tell me about my brother, I began to feel sick every time she called me. after
Yes.
that. So I would have to not answer, let the phone ring, and then I would immediately call her back, because obviously I'm not going to leave my mom alone in this thing. But you know, I just,
trigger.
yeah, I did not want to pick up the phone. You know, so I totally get what you're saying. Like, you know, every time you see something from the Navy or the Navy calls you, it's just like, oof. It's like, you know, I don't know if you get nausea, but it's not fun.
In my closet, I have a 444-page document of conjecture, speculation, and I have a Navy death certificate that says unknown, right?
Oof, yeah.
So I don't know how to express that to other people as a mother, you know, and plus I was one of those mothers that I would have killed somebody for my boy, right? If I could have figured out who did it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a Marine, right?
Yeah.
I'm that kind of person. So it's hard, that controlling saboteur. I wanted to control that narrative and I couldn't, because what can you control? You've got to find that space of forgiveness and that space of allowance. I mean, I just remember in the very beginning when it became clear to me that I needed to forgive Asante's captain of his ship, right?
Yeah, because he's responsible as a leader.
It was a she.
Or she, yeah.
Yes, and they had created this environment on that ship which just wasn't, I mean, I was in the Marines. I don't understand the Navy. I was pissed off. Anyway, I remember meditating on how I was going to forgive her. And then I just remember this vision, and it was like a cracking glass and it was red. And I was just like, I don't want to tell you what I thought about the lady, but it wasn't a place of forgiveness. So I had to like work through all of that. So I feel like every person has got to figure out for themselves where they're going to find this space. For me, it has been gratitude statements. It has been grief recovery method. So I was not able to do traditional grief counseling. I didn't do well when I went to the church even, and they have grief therapy at the church. That didn't work for me. Kind of a little bit, but that ended up in something whole different with me breaking down and crying. That was not for me. Mm-hmm. So I think that everybody has got to know like where you need to go to get the help. But the traditional HMO insurance, that did nothing for me. There was no relief of the pain that I had. I'm very practical. So grief recovery method was practical. It was write these letters, or like do this meditation, or work through these exercises, or here's some NLP techniques to help you to be able to grieve differently. Yeah. So I really needed those things. Maybe other people couldn't even do that kind of stuff, but for me, that's what I needed. And so I think that ultimately being honest with yourself, being true to what your needs are, to acknowledge that you're compromised, or acknowledge that you need support, and what those actual true emotions are is that's imperative.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I always tell my patients, and that I still tell people in medical education now that I don't, now that I'm usually too sick to do full clinical practice, I tell people, you got to be willing to fire your therapist. And if they're professional, they won't take it badly, because the fact is the rapport you have also with the therapist. There was a study that found that is as important, or actually more important than even what technique is used. So that's like one thing I always tell them, like, if it's not working, it's not your fault, not their fault. It's just not working. You're not getting better. Go to someone else. However, there is evidence also for like some techniques do work better for some people. I'm like you. I need I got very frustrated with one pain psychologist I had, because he would never give me any like practical homework. He just wanted to have these conversations, like digging into my soul. And I didn't like that. That made me unhappy and angry. And I felt like he was just trying to argue with me and change my perception of my pain and get me to just like accept it, which wasn't his goal. It's just we didn't quite mesh. My current just overall psychologist, she knows I need assignments, I need the structure, and the structural things are the things that have the most evidence. All the biggest evidence-based methods for PTSD, for example, all involve writing. They all involve like assignments. CBT and EBT usually, which are super effective, usually involve assignments. Unfortunately, a lot of mental health professionals are still trained in like older methods like psychoanalysis, which are not effective and not as evidence.
Well, for me, the wall that I hit was I just felt like I was chronically involved in my victimization, and I did not want to be that person. So the traditional session was really more about me just constantly going in there blathering on about the hurt or pain or what happened, or
rather than doing something about it.
Yeah. No, but I will
totally
say this
get
about pain, because the anxiety and sometimes the physicalness of grief brain can cause, what I found can cause you to have physical pain. And I noticed after transformational coaching that the release with transformational coaching took away a lot of my physical pain.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
And anxiety. Because so before all of this, I had a struggle with food addiction. And I was probably 60 pounds heavier than I am now. So I lost all that weight. But with grief, I was in and out. And so I would go through these moments of grief brain with this food binging, right? So I found that as I began to lighten my load and reduce some of the, saw what my patterns were, understood where my grief was coming from, accept those anger and those emotions and feelings, and then ultimately release them with the transformational coaching, I found that my food binging was a lot, I wouldn't say controllable, but I could come into that place of thought and action and not like starve myself or not gorge like go between those activities that happen or occur. You know what I'm saying? When you're grieving.
Well, and
but meditation is something that's really
pain. Like just chronic pelvic pain ever since the time their son is lost.
Yes.
And it's severe, and there's no, they go to multiple providers, but there's no structural, anatomical, anything wrong with it. Sometimes pelvic floor physical therapy helps with that, but when the source is up here, it can, the best thing you can do is process like you're talking about. That's phenomenal.
And I think through the process, you come to a space of healing. And I would say this, what I have personally learned is that we believe that we are separated from our loved ones, or we believe that the universe is just, we're here and they're gone. I don't know if people are atheists, whatever people believe in. All I can say is that for me, it brought me great comfort to know that those that love me are always there for me, right? And so, as a matter of fact, I'm getting tingly talking about this. So it's nice to I like the transformational coaching piece, because you're going into your subconscious and you're reconnecting with whatever those experiences are. And that brings a certain sense of calm and comfort. You're not alone. You have however you want to call it. You have these memories, you have these experiences, you have this connection.
You still have part of what made them.
Yes.
Yeah. And even if
that's comforting.
Yeah. My mom said that right after he died, she felt like, she was wondering, she said, I think maybe heaven is a dimension that's overlaid on top of ours. And obviously this is very metaphysical, very her feeling.
Yes.
She felt, I feel like it's a dimension that's overlaid over ours. And when we die, we pass through the portal into that dimension. If we, you know, in that system, if we're saved. And so she talked about how she sometimes wonders if, you know, he's nearby, just in that other space, you know, in the same kind of, it's very metaphysical. It's kind of an extreme version of what you're saying. But that kind of thing.
I can't speak to what her experience was, but for my experience, exactly, yes. I always, Asante tells me things, or I hear his voice making jokes about stuff because, you know, or I remember, you know, memories or things that come up for me that put me in a place of gratitude or put me in that space of calm and comfortness. I do want to say one thing before, because I know we're probably getting towards the end, but choice is very important, right? And when you experience a grief moment of severe loss, there's a point where you have a choice or a decision how you are going to be. Are you going to find your way back and live? Or are you going to decide that you can't make it and then live a life of diminished capacity and negativity? I think everybody has that choice, and that's the struggle. For me, every day I was in that place of despair, and I just picked up and said, you know, because you were asking, how do I keep going? I work with my grief brain. I don't know if you want to call it a disability, but I am different, right? And I decided that I would like to spend 70% of my day in positivity, and I could do 30% negative, but the majority of my day had to be something that I loved, that I wanted to do, that I enjoyed doing, that was good for me. And that when Asante could think about me or think about his mom surviving, that he would know that I would push on with his legacy, that because I know he would tell me, Mama, keep going, right? I know he would want me to survive. And so I think people have to find where that is for them and move towards whatever that direction is. But I do know there's some craziness out there because a lot of people have suffered from grief. And so they choose the other route. And so that ends up becoming not a good experience for them.
Yeah.
So I think people have to choose. Which way are you going to be with your grief? How are you going to survive?
Yeah. Thank you very much, folks, for watching. I recommend that you would check out Lament for a Son. Was a book that my mom gave me right after Jonathan passed, but it was very, very good. And also consider looking into, we actually did an entire video with LeVar Burton about loss and pain over on the ASMR channel as well. People can find me at my website, www.aliciamccalla.com. And there I have one of my superhero short reads audiobooks that they can download direct from me, or they could go to any of the retailers and find my works there. I'm on Amazon and other places. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And thank you so much, Mom, for taking the time. Is there any last thing you want to shout out or anything you would like people to check out?
Well, thank you so much for having me, and keep on following Jen because she's got serious things.
Don't say that. That's like when people say, okay, follow Jesus. Don't say follow Jen.
Follow Jesus in life, but follow Jen on YouTube.
Online. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. You're the only one of you. You're the only, like, through genetic, through all the history of all the different meetings that have made you, you know, and all the chemicals that were or not around your mom, and all the neurotransmitters, how she was feeling, what she had for breakfast at what time, or like all these different things, all the things that you have eaten in your life that have now become you, all the different molecules that have come from all over. You're the only one of you in all of history. There may be someone else who has the exact same genetics. You may have a twin, but they're not actually the same as you, okay? Because there's always going to be something that makes only you. So
Right.
yeah, so we need you.
We need you, and feel yourself surprisingly, 5 years later, sliding right, right back there next to the chasm, and you think you're gonna just fall right in there. Don't be afraid to reach out. The best thing anyone can do with their life is to come along somebody else. So you're not wasting anybody's time. It's really important that you reach out. It's important to your friends. It's important to your loved ones, and talk, or just say, "Can you sit with me for a while? I'm really feeling down."
Yeah, and what you're saying is really you're giving the other person a chance to become who they're meant to be. You're giving them a chance to kind of be a hero as well. So it's weird to say it, but in some ways you do a kindness by letting other people into your suffering.